All right, here to help us break down all of the legal news happening, Senator Menendez, the latest in the Trump indictments, Hunter Biden stuff. I can think of nobody better. I saw him on TV recently, CNN legal analyst, a former deputy assistant attorney general for the Department of Justice, and the principal over at the Rabin Group. You got too many jobs, Elliot.
I got a lot of jobs. So it's, because I'm Jamaican. That's why I just got, yeah.
I love it. Elliot Williams joining us. Elliot, Mike, and Nick, thank you so much for hopping on the podcast, taking out some time.
No, of course. Great to talk to you. I love the work you do. I've listened to your stuff. So yeah, we're here.
Well, I appreciate that. That is going to be a gold star for our editor there, Tim Meehan, to cut that out. Elliot, let me start at the top here because, in our last episode, we were talking about the Senator Menendez charges, and we kind of teased to the folks out there that you would be coming on the program. It always happens when something breaks. Yeah, we have an attorney that's following up in the next episode. Yeah. I'm just curious from your perspective now as somebody who's worked for the legislative branch, somebody who's worked for the executive branch. You have so much experience here, and as an attorney as well. And you see the Senator Menendez charges twice in the past 8 years. He's been charged with bribery here. What do you make of the latest charges around Senator Menendez, and then the calls for him to resign? And in that process, what do you make of it all?
So it's a few different things. I think, I would separate out as a former prosecutor, I'd separate out the former charges. He was charged with conduct that the jury ended up hanging on. And I think there's an impulse to sort of lump it all together and say that, well, if someone did something in the past, then necessarily they had to have been doing it now. Not good, not great for an elected official or a senator to be engaged in by any means. But the mere fact that he sort of had a bit of a history of being charged before, I don't want to hold against him, to be perfectly candid. Now, these charges are incredibly serious, both in terms of the evidence that they seem to have against him, and the nature of the conduct, where you're talking about potentially, at least allegations of trading favors for cash or gold, using one's title for personal gain. It's incredibly serious. Now, even if, and I mean this, even if he's ultimately not convicted of a crime, this is your final question about calls for him to resign. Even if he's not convicted, the allegations themselves are probably serious and substantiated enough that it's not a great position for a United States senator to be in, even having been accused in the way that he has. So I am sensitive to these calls for him to step down, but that's up to him and frankly, and his colleagues and the voters of the state of New Jersey, which I used to be, I'm no longer, for them to decide as well.
Elliot, to that end, on a previous episode, we were looking at some of the data from GovTrack, which kind of just tracks down, you're familiar with, obviously. In your experience, when you look at, currently what's going on with Senator Menendez in terms of the charges that have been brought up and just really how that's being treated as a legal matter. And when we think of other legislative misconduct, in your experience, for the most part, not the stakes get raised, but do you find that the way those charges are handled, the way those cases are prosecuted, what runs consistent as it does in most cases, or are there some extenuating factors that sometimes make these cases harder to really go through a legal process?
Yeah. The case isn't any harder. It's the same statute, regardless of whether you're a senator or Pookie from the wrong side of town. Now, when it is a senator, there are added considerations as to what will the publicity around this be, and not unlike was it Omar or Stringer Bell on The Wire who says, "You come at the king, you best not miss." And it's sort of, there's a greater pressure on prosecutors to make sure that they get it right if they are going to start indicting beloved political figures. Then you got to make sure that you're charged. Now, look, if you're talking about taking somebody's liberty away, you always have to make sure that your stuff looks tight. But to be perfectly candid, prosecutors read the same newspapers you and I do and are well aware of the blowback if they fail or do something unethical or wrong when going after an elected official. And it's happened before. Ted Stevens in Alaska, the former senator, was the best example of a junk indictment that ultimately ended up being thrown out. Or overturned, pardon, yeah.
No, I was going to say, Elliot, quoting The Wire is going to get you up on our bucket list of return guests all the time, my friend.
There you go.
We do it all the time here. So
just not season 5 because it was trash.
Okay, well, there we go.
I can't say it. You know what? Now that I've been sort of a little more public and prominent, I don't really like trashing people's work because somebody worked hard on that, and people are really mean on the internet. But let me say, season 4 was genius, was magical poetry. Season 5 went in a slightly different direction. Let me say that. That's more.
It's the homeless person story that does it, right?
Yes,
like it's the homeless biting thing. Like just I don't know where they were going.
Well, I mean, as a former HBO employee that worked in programming, we apologize. So I want to pivot now to the former president of the United States here. Because
wait, which one? Which former president?
Former President Trump.
Well, sorry. I just wasn't sure. Are we talking Clinton, right. Nixon, or Coolidge? Gerald Ford, Jimmy Carter's certain time 99 years old. So I just wasn't sure, just making sure.
Great point.
You never know.
Is Calvin Coolidge still alive? Anyway,
I know, right? Well, he's been indicted a couple times. Oh no, he hasn't actually.
Yeah. So let's stay on this former president here, because a lot has happened so far in Georgia. I haven't been following it too closely, but I do know that Scott Hall, the former Republican bail bondsman, has been the first of the co-defendants to flip so far. And now he's going to start offering testimony against Sidney Powell, Jeffrey Clark. I'm curious from your perspective, first off, a high level, all of these indictments across the different jurisdictions and whether or not some of these cases come before November of 2024. What's your read on that? And then can you bring us up to speed in the latest in these Georgia indictments and this co-defendant that flipped now, and what this means ultimately?
Yeah. All right. So in terms of all the different jurisdictions, you all, although the two of you clearly are more learned than your average podcast host, but most people, look at that, right? Most human beings do not have their heads around, I think, all the differences in these cases. They're very complicated. And if you were to ask people to try to explain that there is a federal prosecutor bringing federal cases in Washington, D.C. and the federal district in Florida, there is a state prosecutor bringing a state case under the laws of Georgia in Fulton County, Georgia. There's a state prosecutor bringing a local Manhattan district attorney case in New York City, and a state attorney general bringing a civil suit on behalf of all of the residents of the state of New York. It's mind-blowing, and people sort of lump it all in together. So it's quite confusing. What we're talking about here, at least in the context of this case, is Fulton County, Georgia. Fani Willis, the district attorney there, bringing charges against the former president. But it is dizzying, and that's frankly a great argument that the Trump people have, saying that, well, everybody's coming to get me. It's all one big deep state collusive mess, right? It's not true, but that's the argument. I think it resonates with people because it's so all over the place. Now, Fulton County, I think the significance of an individual pleading guilty, I'm not surprised that that's happened. When you have the staggering number of defendants that you have in a case, they're eventually going to start turning on each other at a certain point, whether it's crabs in a barrel or you got a better metaphor somewhere, but they're eventually going to start going up because they have a huge incentive to do so. It's number one, if you're talking about the risk of jail or not, most rational individuals would probably choose jail. Number two, the overwhelming majority of crimes plead out, particularly at the federal level, but at the state level too. The vast majority. At the federal level, it's 97 or 98%. It's that high. People plead guilty, and you get a benefit on your sentence by pleading guilty and turning evidence. So all of those reasons lead toward an individual really having a huge incentive to plead guilty and start providing testimony. Now, he has to be answered truthfully and provide every piece of information that he knows. And if prosecutors aren't convinced that he's being straight with them, then they can revoke the plea deal and take him to trial.
Elliot, as we're talking about these upcoming cases, just a little earlier today, as we're recording, the Attorney General was featured on 60 Minutes. Just obviously a profile piece, which got me thinking about, where is our recent assessment? It seems like we've had sort of a roller coaster in the way we've assessed the current Attorney General as being someone who's not really taken a lot of action, has had a lot of opportunity to take action, still nothing happens. And now we're on the other side of it where you've got a special counsel in Jack Smith that's moving forward. From your stance, where would you assess this Attorney General? Where do you see the relationship between, and this comes up for us often on this show, about the characterization about how the White House may weaponize, the Justice Department. Mm-hmm. But feel free to just dispel that as it relates to this current administration, but also your assessment of the Attorney General.
Well, I think, well, first of all, who's the we? When you talk about we've had questions, I mean, if we're talking about the Can We Please Talk podcast or some nebulous we in the country, because it's a fair question, because I think there's this notion that there's a universal opinion about either the effectiveness or ineffectiveness of the attorney general. I think, and that's just food for everyone's thought when we think of the we, who's the we? Like George W. Bush would say, who the them was. But simply, what I think people are seeing, regardless of the merits of how Merrick Garland is or isn't doing, is that it can take a long time to bring cases to trial. And I think, to me, it is completely unsurprising that it took months, if not years, to bring prosecutions. Now, there's certainly the criticism that is made that what the Justice Department should have done was just start going to the top of the food chain after January 6th. And what took them so long? Well, what you saw was that took them so long. They charged 1,000 people with crimes and then brought in a special counsel who ended up indicting a president of the United States. Now, to me, 2 years, 3 years, it's just not that long in the grand scheme of the arc of bringing federal investigations. But we live in a 24-hour news cycle world. We live in a world of Twitter and Instagram and Facebook and all that, which is, to me, just incompatible with this world of prosecutors that operate in months, if not years, to bring people to justice.
Elliot, it's so funny. We mentioned the word special counsel, and I wanted to pivot, and weaponization too, another buzzword that's been all across cable news outlets, podcasts, the proverbial, like you said. Hunter Biden. For some reason, Hunter Biden has drawn the ire of every American citizen in one way or the other.
Oh,
I want to get, I know.
Wait, who?
Exactly, Hunter.
The president's last name is Biden, right? So
right.
Who's
right.
It's his kid, right? It was one of his, right? Is that it? Sorry, man. I don't read the news.
I know. Incredibly prepared, Ellie. That's why we had him on, folks.
I know, man.
Hunter Biden, these federal firearm charges, the special counsel, I would love for you to break this all down, because there's so much hypocrisy going on with it. First, we want him to be appointed as special counsel, and then the special counsel is appointed. No, we don't want that guy being the special counsel. Now there's the first charges and the judge saying that, hey, this is not my job to determine the terms of this plea deal. I think I'm kind of summarizing that a little bit. Mm-hmm. Would love to get your legal analysis on that. But what do you make of the initial plea deal and agreement falling through, these current charges right now? Same thing to Nick's point about Attorney General Garland trying to show that there's a line here between the Department of Justice, the White House, and special counsel. I'm going to let special counsel run its course and oversee this investigation. Here we have these charges, and for some reason, it's not appeasing a base of people. What do you make of it all?
Well, a couple things. I think on what I find fascinating is the relationship of the special counsel with the attorney general, and what people the shifting goalposts for what people expect or want. Because first it was, well, you need to have a special counsel so that the White House isn't putting the thumb on the scale of these investigations. And then the narrative came out that, well, what do you mean you're not talking to the White House? You ought to coordinate with the White House. So I just think this idea of how independent the special counsel is a significant and fair, or an unfair question that's being asked. Now, with respect to a plea deal falling out, the most important thing I can say and will say is that you can, until the man is convicted by a jury and the judge is about to read him a sentence, or convicted by a jury, until a jury returns a verdict, a plea is always possible. And like getting back to my point that I raised a little earlier in the program, it's entirely possible that because of the percentage of people that end up pleading guilty, it's entirely possible that he still pleads guilty at some point. Like, you're not obligated to bring a guy to trial just because he's the president's son. So plea deals fall apart all the time. Now, this idea of whether it's a sweetheart deal or whatever, I just don't know the backstory, and I look forward to reading the books about it in 10 years. I think the bigger question that's lingering out there is that the precise gun charge that has been brought against him is on shaky constitutional ground. This idea of creating a prohibition around the possession of a firearm based on whether you have been a drug user or indicted or so on might actually get struck down by the Supreme Court. And it's fascinating that it's the political right in the country that has been angling for that, and the political left in the country that's actually been coming to the defense of Hunter Biden, that sort of are going to be at cross purposes on this. Because what's the Biden administration going to do? Are they going to call for agree with striking this statute down? Are they going to take a position on it, knowing full well that the president's son is being charged with it? But gradually, that particular charge, which I brought as a prosecutor under 18 USC 922, if you want to get all fancy and talk about the numbers, but I think its days are numbered looking at where the courts are right now. So that'll really be interesting to see how that plays out.
Elliot, before we let you go, you've done a fantastic job today, from The Wire to Senator Menendez. You can break it all down. And I had something as I was looking at your profile that I mentioned to you off air. I want to bring it over here. I didn't realize you worked for 7 years as an assistant director for legislative affairs for ICE, for the Immigration and Customs Enforcement Agency. So we've done so much on the border here. Nick and I are both children of immigrants. I'm very.
As am I.
There we go. And I'm curious, from your perspective, President Biden and the handling of the border reporters that we have talked to down there have said it doesn't matter what administration is in place right now. Some of the failed policies, and we can kind of drill into that. And I would love to get your expertise on it, but no one's really tackled the true root problem, right? And some would point to the Triangle nations and the socioeconomic issues that they're facing. What do you make of it all, from not only the coverage, but the current administration's handling of and the policies that they're administering here at our U.S. southern border?
No, I think you're right. It's not a question of right and wrong. There's no answer to the question. And I think the administration is doing the best they can do with an impossible situation. And I do buy and agree with the premise of the question, which is that it's an intractable problem that hasn't been fixed and no one has the solution to. Now, you can go back to the 80s and 90s and like the last time there was meaningful legislation that made it through Congress. You're going back decades at this point, because Congress can't seem to agree on how to address immigration issues. And in many respects, and this is not to minimize the realities of border crossings or the safety at the border, and so on, but there has not been meaningful action by Congress on this issue in decades, and it's become highly politicized. So, look, there's a whole ass other episode for us to talk. I'm not going to do it, because that's not my circus, not my monkeys, as the Polish would say. But there's there's any number of factors that go into the quagmire at the southern border. And I don't think there's a single solution to it. When I worked in Congress, this would have been 2007 and 2008, there was meaningful attempts at getting toward comprehensive reform, but they all sort of fell flat. And I just think there isn't. I wish I had a better answer for you, but there really is not a great solution. And a lot of it is whoever is holding the bag at any point is going to, be held accountable for it. Now, there's a lot of polling in the last year that people are quite critical of how President Biden is handling the border. Now, whether that is a broader point that is showing criticism that Democrats are not as credible on the border, whether it is showing frustration with Joe Biden, whether it's the economy and people are looking for escape, whatever it is, but the polling doesn't lie, or the data don't lie right now. People trust Republicans more with the border for whatever reason, and maybe because it's been framed as an enforcement issue. When in reality you could make an argument that immigration is as much an economic issue as it is a public safety one. Now, there's certainly public safety elements and components to border and interior enforcement. There are, there's no question. It's that doesn't mean we need drones and lots of drones and tanks at the border, but you might need some, and some, who knows? But there are also major economic drivers of immigration as well. And what was most alarming during President Trump's administration was when you start talking about closing major ports of entry like the San Diego border, you are talking about hundreds of millions of dollars to the United States being lost a day. You're talking about millions of people who cross to work in both countries legally as well, who wouldn't be allowed to do so. So these ideas of sort of an all enforcement approach, while it resonates with the public, particularly with crime rates up in the country, simply are just not, it cannot be an enforcement only solution. You have to think of what some of the economic realities are, some of the humanitarian realities and so on. So, I gave you like a 7-minute answer there, when you probably wanted me to say, yeah, Joe Biden's doing great. But it's, I will tell you, when I was there at ICE, there was no winning, because for the quick anecdote, for the first 2 years when we were there, it was a Democratic controlled Congress, and a lot of the fire coming toward the Department of Homeland Security, ICE is in the Department of Homeland Security. A lot of the fire came from the political left in Congress. Then it switched in 2010, 2011, really, when Republicans took control of Congress. And then it just became a free-for-all and open season, and the congressional oversight and the subpoenas started coming in from the right. So whoever was in power was incredibly critical of the apparatus, because with Democrats, it was, you are overly enforcing, you're kicking down the doors of meatpacking plants. How dare you? People who are Obama's core supporters, you're turning your backs on them. And then the moment Republicans came in, it was amnesty, amnesty, amnesty. You've granted amnesty to all these millions of people. It's open borders and lawlessness, and people are running across the border with TVs, and like these 9-foot tall, like giant, humanoid, non-human people are walking through the forest and are terrorizing us. It just, so, I'm not giving a wishy-washy, middle-of-the-road centrist answer on immigration, but it just, there really is an intractable problem that the current Congress, at least as it's situated, is not in a position to fix.
Elliot, there is no such thing as a short or long answer on a podcast format. That's why we have you
I know,
on.
right?
Yeah, because you can cover so much ground across all of these issues. You can catch Elliot all the time on CNN. He's a former deputy assistant attorney general, and he's obviously a principal over at the Rabin Group. Elliot, I can't thank you enough for hopping on the podcast with us. Continued success to you, my friend. Please stay safe.
Thank you. Yeah, stay safe. And then we got to just talk more Wired. It's just sort of, I'm trying to think of another quick McNulty reference, but now I'm on the spot. I got nothing.
Hey, thanks for watching the Can We Please Talk podcast. Whatever clip you just watched, we hope you enjoyed it, and we hope you stick around for some more. Subscribe to the channel. My partner's over here smashing the button. Come on, do him a favor. So hit subscribe.